Welcome to another edition of Mystery Wine Blind Tasting with me, your host, Neal, from Field and Main Restaurant, and tonight via my dining room. So excited to have you with us on this beautiful spring evening. Who's joining us tonight for this special program dedicated to a varietal that I'm going to tell you about in just a second, and then we're going to work our way around the world trying to figure out where this particular wine is from, but understanding that this is a particular varietal that you don't need to worry about guessing tonight because it is Riesling. And if you didn't know that by the first sniff, we're going to talk about how and why it is Riesling based on just that first sniff alone. But Jan, good evening to you. Welcome. Super excited to have you with us this evening. And Trish and Andy and Kathy are here tonight, as they have been so loyally each and every week. Thanks so much for joining us. Wow. Yes, it smells like Riesling. Who else is with us this evening? Jan and Bobby are here. Yay. Great to see you too. Leon and Kim are with us this evening. Carrie, hi, how are you? Wonderful to have you with us tonight too. For those that are just joining, we're going to do another in the series of kind of this sub-series of this tasting, which is to identify the varietal itself and not have to worry so much about what the varietal might be, and instead focus on the characteristics of the aroma and of the taste that are really indicative of this varietal, and then parse out where those changes might be that would come from because of a place, a particular place. And so Rob and Kathy are here, and Chris Pearman's with us this evening. Hey, sir, how are you? There's no Riesling with some people. And there should be Riesling with everyone, right? Rachel's with us tonight, and Eric and Wendy are joining us. Kathy is here tonight, too. Hi, Kathy. Carrie, congratulations. That's great. You just started WSET level 3. So this is great practice for that. That is cool. Congratulations. It's awesome to see that a number of you have gone through that program. And I was reflecting on that earlier today with someone that I am now learning more by doing this because of the feedback that I'm getting from all of you via this chat line. So a lot of you have made such tremendous strides in the past year, and you know a great deal more about wine than you did before, and that's in part due to this, but much more so because of your own study and your own forays into consuming wine has helped along those routes. So Candy and Kevin and Kathy are joining us this evening. Jen and Erica Chan and others are here and celebrating your birthday, Jen. Oh, happy birthday to you. That's so great. Well, happy birthday, and thank you for celebrating with us this evening. That's wonderful. Cheers to you and your birth. And the Swanbergs are joining us. Great. And Nicole and Stephen and Letts are here too. Wonderful. All right, guys. Well, let's begin and just talk a little bit about Riesling, right? Riesling's a varietal that's been grown for a very long time. It's a varietal that many consider to be a noble grape, and noble would be referring to a grape that has pedigree, history, a capability of expressing place, so of showcasing terroir, capability of aging, and that's certainly the case with Riesling. Around the turn of the last century, Riesling was probably more popular than Bordeaux in terms of the fashion of the day. It sold for more money. It was regarded well, and has sort of since fallen from a more mass favor, and that's probably due in part to the idea that most of the time we associate Riesling with being something sweet, and that sweetness is something that in our present mode has been kind of declassified, if you will, from a nobility standing. So if you think about a time, though, where the climate wasn't as warm and where ripeness and the ubiquity of sugar wasn't necessarily as easily found, something that had sugar to it and sweetness made it pretty special. And so having a wine that was like this, or I'm not sure about this yet in terms of sweetness, but Riesling in general being something that is sweet was prized. And the Germans in particular specialized in making some really spectacular, and still do, sweet wines. But what we're finding is that a number of Rieslings are being made more and more dry to match the fashion of the day and to showcase a different style and a different profile of Riesling. And thank you, Chris. Yes, Jancis Robinson says this is the queen of all wine. I would agree with that. I think this is a wine that should be part of everybody's at least understanding of wine. And I'm remiss in saying that I would find pretty much it hard to understand why someone, after trying a series of these wines, wouldn't necessarily begin to love them, because they have such an amazing food affinity. They are enjoyable to drink on their own. They age wonderfully well, and there's such a variety to them in terms of the profiles that you can get, from something very, very sweet to something bone dry with racy acidity running throughout as a whole. So pretty special. Craig and Lauren are joining us, and Ruth, good evening to you, and welcome here for the first time. We're excited to have you. This group that you will get to see by way of their comments over the next 20 minutes or so is well versed now in sort of a blind format of tasting, that we work at trying to understand the varietal and the place, and we do that by a sort of hybrid model of the Court of Master Sommeliers, the WSETT program, and sort of our own overlays from Field and Maine, and how you would deductively work your way through a wine, picking up on points that are in the wine that would indicate where the wine might be from and what varietal it might be. But tonight's a little bit different in that we just get to talk about Riesling. So hello to you, Susan, and great to have you with us. And yes, Riesling with exclamation points. All right, so let's talk about Riesling as a general varietal and what kind of characteristics you pick up in this. So you tell me, what are you smelling? What do you see in this varietal? And let's talk about what characteristics that we pick out would be kind of typical of Riesling pretty much everywhere. Is this a kind of dark colored wine with an opaqueness to it, or is it usually something that's a little bit on the lighter, brighter, more pale side of things? Is it a muted wine that doesn't necessarily give you expressive aromatics, or is it the reverse, where it's very, very aromatic? Hi, Kelly. Susan, yes. Susan Petrol for sure is one of those indicating notes from the nose. So this is a pale wine, strawish colored, right? Lemonish colored, pale yellow. Thank you, Jeff and Adrian. Yes. Light nose, straw color. Yeah, exactly. Clear lemon, medium intensity. It can go from kind of more of a watery-ish to sort of a medium. It's not a bold, rich, robust, powerful wine. And that's oftentimes because it's really rarely ever made in new oak, right? It's not going to get an aging profile that comes from new oak. Oak isn't necessarily part of the signature of any Riesling. It's oftentimes done in stainless steel or neutral barrels, or some partial perhaps new, but more often than not, it's about just a vessel that carries this brightness and this vibrancy. It's a very aromatic grape, to Kathy's point. Right off the bat, right? Just you could even not smell in the glass, but you're going to go by the glass and you're going to pick up aromas. This is a wine, a varietal in particular, that just offers so much. And that's why it's one of the joys of the blind tasting world. If someone pours you Riesling, you kind of rock back inside and go, oh, I don't have to think about the varietal. I think this is 100% Riesling. I'm going with it. And Craig, yes, green apple is another characteristic that you find oftentimes in Riesling. Candy, I love that description. It smells like it's too easy to drink and maybe Austrian. And that's interesting. Let's kind of parse into that in just a minute. But for sure, I find Riesling wonderfully easy to drink, partly because, especially in the sweeter variations, they're at lower alcohol. So you have wines coming from Germany, in particular with its Predikat system that ranks wines based on quality level, and quality relates more specifically to ripeness. And so if you think about sort of the Cabernet, Spätlese, Auslese, Baron Auslese, Trockenbaron Auslese, those series, those levels refer to a level of ripeness that's in a given vintage. So it's possible that your Cabernet level it is in fact the case usually that your Cabernet level would have lower alcohol and or less sugar than your Spätlese in a given year, but it is possible that your Cabernet might be sweeter in one year than the Spätlese of another year, just based on the particular vintage and the characteristics of that vintage and how it impacted the growth and the ripening in particular of the fruit. So if you think about quality related to sweetness, related to potential alcohol, and we're talking again about sugar becoming alcohol, so yeast eating that sugar and kicking out carbon dioxide and alcohol, the riper a piece of fruit, the riper a grape, the more potential alcohol, or the potential to stop that fermentation and leave residual sugar, which is what's the case with Riesling. And so Riesling in Germany oftentimes is sweet, and like I said earlier, it's now something that you're starting to see drier variations on the production of Riesling. And so you could get a German Riesling that's dry. Candy was noting that she thinks this smelled Austrian. More often than not, Austrian wines won't have a very high level of residual sugar, so they're drier. So one of the telltale hints right off the bat, if you're considering, say, Germany and Austria in your tasting, and it's a blind tasting, you're like, I think this is Riesling, you taste it and it's dry, you should start thinking more that it would be Austrian than German. But that's starting to change quite a bit, in that there are many, many houses in Germany that are producing a dry variation as well. Tons of citrus, a little oak. We'll see about that as we get to it. But I think that minerality element, there's the petrol quality, but citrus and green apple. Lime is oftentimes a key indicator of Riesling. The green apple is absolutely an indicator. The petrol that was noted. Erica's picking up some candied pear. That's fantastic. So a tree fruit like apple or pear. And sometimes in that sweetness element can kind of come in the way of candied. So Rachel, are you saying that you think this wine is medium sweetness? Have you tasted it yet? We'll get to a full understanding of sweetness once we taste it. But yeah, there is sometimes also a little bit of apricot that you can pick up in a wine. I'm not picking up a bunch on this one. It's more of that petrol element. And petrol, for those of you that are having a difficulty with that particular term, I did when I first started. Like, what do they mean by petrol? So a gasoline quality, but also petroleum-based products. So you could have anything from sort of a rubbery element to Vaseline, something along those lines, all the way through to just fresh pumped gas. Erica's saying her German friend says Australia. That's very cool. Yes. So we can also talk, and should talk, a little bit about where we would find Riesling. So Germany we've mentioned, Austria we've mentioned, Australia was just mentioned, which is great. And the Germans brought Riesling in the 1840s, 50s, 60s to Australia. And so Riesling's been in Australia for a very long time. So from the old world perspective, Germany and Austria are kind of the two principal. But we shouldn't forget about Alsace. Alsace, nearly German, although on the other side of the border in France, would give you another variation on Riesling. You find Riesling grown almost everywhere, but from a blind tasting context, if you're saying, I smell and think this is Riesling, I taste Riesling, and you should consider Germany, Austria, Alsace, you should consider Australia, you should consider, how about on the New World side of things, where else would we find this? Erica's throwing out New Zealand, a little bit of Jolly Rancher fruit. You can certainly find Riesling in New Zealand, but more typically, you're going to talk about, say, from the United States side of things, New York, the Finger Lakes region producing some fantastic Rieslings. You're also going to find it in Washington State. Dr. Lozen, for example, has a key collaboration with Chateau Saint Michel, making some great Riesling in Washington State, and there's a number of others producing Riesling there. So yes, Swanbergs are noting Washington State. Thank you, Kimberly, as well. Yes, 100%. Tasmania, a cool climate space in Australia growing it. And then for sure, Bradley, Linden and Virginia growing Riesling too. I think certainly in our context, tasting wines in Virginia, we should always consider whether or not something's coming from Virginia. But we have a handful then of at least places, more than a handful, almost two handfuls. John Bono saying, don't forget about Alto Adige and the northern part of Italy. So yes, that's certainly something we should consider as well. So one of the throughputs of all those places is generally a relatively cool climate. Right? You're not talking about a place that is full-on super warm. California was mentioned, and certainly when you do find Riesling from California, it's not necessarily in the warmest spots. It's in the cooler spots that you find Riesling grown. So when you smell and you think you've identified Riesling, you're already starting to think about a cool climate place. In the reverse, if you smell lime and minerality and you have bright acidity and you are noting some kind of tree fruit, whether it be apple or pear, perhaps apricot, start thinking about Riesling as being one of those varietals that you should be considering. One of the telltale signs, though, too, for Riesling is that minerality, that petroleum element, too. So when you pick up on that, and it's not often found in other varietals, it's certainly a big indicator that you should consider Riesling. So now the question becomes, is this dry or sweet? And what flavor profiles do we find on the palate that we found on the nose? And what do those profiles tell us about where this particular wine might come from? And how do we get closer to understanding whether this is Germany, Austria, Australia, New Zealand, Alto Adige, Italy, New York, Washington, Virginia, California, or somewhere else obscure. And I'll tell you this, I don't think this would be like an obscure bottling of Riesling. I think this would be probably fairly typical of a particular place. So, Tony and Julie kind of working on this. I think they were trying to give us something to think about, but not necessarily challenge us. And if we're playing the Chris Shirley game, this screw cap makes me think of Austria, makes me think of perhaps Australia. It could be New York, could be Washington, but it's Riesling that's in screw cap. So this is not necessarily giving away anything, but you also find it in Germany too. So, but it's a screw capped wine, and it is in a tall, slender bottle, which if you're playing just the bottle game, that would also be an indication that you should think about the varietal Riesling. If you're just sneaking a peek at a bottle, that tall, slender bottle would be something that would indicate potentially Riesling. So Jan's thrown out Austria. Rachel likes Italy. Okay, good. So let's get down into the details then. Tell me a little bit more about why you think Austria or why you think Italy as we taste this wine. High acidity. For those that are looking for an example of what low, medium, and high acidity would be, this is your benchmark or one of them for high acidity. Wow. Tons of it, right? Explosive, like sucking on a lime. Just a juicy explosion, total salivation. So lime is there on the palate, right? What else do you pick up on the palate? Just behind that, there was, excuse me, almost more of a tropical note. I like it how candy's coming out guns a-blazing. 18 Trocken, meaning dry. Trocken means dry. Germany or Austria, something on the Rhine perhaps. She's noting that locale. High acidity, very dry, great wine. I agree with all that you said there in terms of the structure. I'm not sure yet about Germany or Austria, but I think the high acidity, it's beautiful wine. This is just gorgeous. It's not sweet, so this is pretty dry. On the back end of the finish of the wine is where you're going to determine the sweetness. So some of the alcohol up front, some of that kind of tropical notes, that limey note, makes you think about the fact that this might be sweet, and then it's on the finish, lingering finish. Do you get any residual sugar? And I almost have kind of like after you're swimming in the ocean, which I think, Chris, you might still be swimming in the ocean, that sort of saline rinse that's in your mouth, that's sort of that minerality still there. That's present in this wine. And the acidity lingers, but there's no sweetness there. There's no sugar there. There are things that you associate with something that's sweet, but there isn't actually any residual sugar, I don't think, remaining in this one. Kathy's shooting off the hip too and saying Australia, citrus lime, lime cordial in particular, which is part of that sweet lime profile, medium body, less petrol than other Rieslings. I don't pick up the petrol as much on the palate, but I certainly get it on the nose. Oh, I love that, Kimberly. That's an awesome statement too. Kimberly saying she's tying one on, as in Thai food, the food cuisine of Thailand. This would be delicious with basil and lime and spice. Wonderful with all those flavors. The kaffir lime, for example. Ooh, that'd be fantastic. And if you're eating a tom kha soup with that kaffir lime and the coconut and a brightness coming from sort of rice wine vinegar or lime juice would be tremendous. Oh, man. And a further fantastic description of what you want to do with this wine from Candy, saying it makes you want to float on a lake. Yeah, Riesling just makes me happy. When I'm drinking Riesling, there are wines like, I love Chenin Blanc. We've talked how much we just enjoy and thoroughly love Chenin Blanc, but the character of Chenin Blanc, I end up wanting to think about more of it. Riesling just, I want to consume it and relish it, revel in it. It's just a special wine. All right. So, getting now down more to place, it's a wine that Kathy's noting out has more alcohol than you would tend to see in Germany and Austria, which would indicate that it would be taken dry. So if it's a dry wine, it's going to have more alcohol than if it was left with residual sugar. And so it could be a dry wine from Austria or Germany. She's saying she thinks it's going to give you a bit more alcohol than you'd find in Germany and Austria. And that's where you start to think about the quality designations. If you're talking about something that was Spätlese or could be Spätlese but was done Trocken or dry, you'd have a potentially higher alcohol and you'd have more viscosity, you'd have a richer profile, a bit weightier wine. That's where Riesling shows its real capability to be a bunch of different things just under the heading of one varietal. So you can have a 7.5% light, off-dry, easygoing, sweetened, fun cabinet level wine. And you could also have a Trocken, dry, Großgewachs kind of great cru, kind of great growth, rich, robust, powerful wine that has 13-14% alcohol, and they're both Riesling, but they're in very different places. So with that in mind, let's think about the alcohol here. Let's dive into the texture of this wine. Is it sort of on the skim milk side of things? Is it in a 2% side of things? Is it in a whole milk side of things? Where does this wine hit you in the palate with texture? And is that any indication of alcohol? Also take a peek at the legs. Riesling's also a little bit of a difficulty with legs because if it does have residual sugar, it's not going to give you a great indication of alcohol per se, but it will give you some indication of how ripe the wine might have been, and then you can kind of parse out whether or not we're talking about a medium, a low kind of alcohol or a high level of alcohol. So yeah, sorry I didn't scroll up there. Chris was asking about the alcohol level too, so that's where we're going next. Kathy's saying 12.5, maybe 13%. Craig's saying the same thing. The legs are pretty spaced, but they're thin and sheeting. It comes in piercing with that acidity, which makes you think it's lean, but then it does expand a bit in the back, right? It gets into that sort of medium weight, maybe medium plus weight, but for sure medium weight. Klukas, Olga is saying that this is citrus rind plus candy plus body plus Granny Smith equals New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. That's awesome. Okay, so those characteristics are taking her there, and you certainly get cool climate elements in New Zealand, and you get some fun Riesling from there for sure. But we're in a medium plus weight, so are we in something that would be sort of super tropical and ripe like a California production? You see some more tropical character coming, I think, typically from Washington, but sometimes you get the characteristics of this wine in all of these places that we're describing. We're trying to now parse out where it's a little bit different and why. I think you get a little bit more density, kind of a core density in Austria of less lime pronouncement, more of that minerality, and perhaps more fruited elements, more of that stone element. This is all about that salty minerality for me and that lime. How about you? The things that we've noted that are kind of universal are the petrol, the lime, some of that stone fruit, some of that minerality. Sometimes you get a little beeswax. Sometimes you get some jasmine, some aromatic that way. Sometimes slate. That minerality can taste slaty, stony, and that's not this. And so that kind of leads me away from, say, Germany. Certainly away from a dry variation from the Mosel in particular, or the southwestern part of Germany. That salinity is something that I'm thinking of a particular place in mind, and I don't usually get that. So even say Virginia Riesling, I get a lot of the aromatic quality, I get a lot of the acidity element, but that salinity is what's taking me in a particular place. That's differentiating this wine from other places, say from Washington, from Oregon, making Riesling to Washington State, Oregon, California, New York. New York, I always get a little more amplitude in the wine. This seems to be laser precise as opposed to just if it's in a lane, it's a thin, narrow lane, and this one has that thin, narrow lane. And when you're in New York, it's just a bit wider lane. It has a bit more plushness to it, generally speaking. Candy, how many bottles do we have? I'm sure we have a few bottles left, and I think we can get more if that's of interest. We certainly would love to supply you with some more Riesling. Rachel's still sticking with Italy and throwing out 2017. Craig's saying 2018 Southern Hemisphere. So that would cover for you kind of New Zealand, Australia, Tasmania, as Chris threw out there. And yeah, you have, I think, Chris, your point there that Washington and Oregon give you a bit more of a sweetness. I think there can be more sweetness, or there at least is a little bit more alcohol, kind of viscosity in the wine if it's taken dry. And so this seems to be, to me, like 12 and a half, push 13 perhaps, but 12.5% alcohol. And that salinity, as I was saying, was taking me to a particular place. And I had the occasion when I was touring Australia to taste wines from the Clare Valley and from the Eden Valley. And Clare Valley just had some of that kind of really piercing acidity. The Eden Valley had some of that salinity. Both did, in fact. And so you go up to with an Australian winemaker who makes wines in these places, and they take you up in a 4x4, and you're up on these rocky crag slopes, and Riesling's growing there, and they have a platter of oysters with lemon and lime, and you're just spritzing that on top of briny, minerally oysters and drinking this. You don't even need the lemon or lime because this becomes the lemon and lime as an accompaniment to those oysters. And so I'm headed in that direction. I like the Southern Hemisphere call. But I'm trying to figure out whether or not it might be Eden Valley versus Clare Valley. If this was Austria, I think I would get, like I said, just a bit more density. If this was Germany, I think we might see a bit more plushness and a bit more of a tropical note. I got a little bit of that on the palate, but I definitely didn't get a lot on the aroma, and it definitely doesn't linger. And then, like we talked about from New York and the United States kind of productions, I don't know that you'd get the same sort of piercing linearity and the minerality, salinity that's found here. So Kathy's going Clare Valley 2019. That's a good guess. I mean, I'm comfortable with Clare. I think there's just a little bit less super acid in the Eden Valley. The Eden Valley sits just above the Barossa Valley. So you're running this long valley in Australia, the Barossa Valley, where most of us would know at least Shiraz is produced, warm and hot, and you go on the hillsides off the valley floor, and it's a little bit cooler, but then up one ridge of the hill of the side of the Barossa Valley, and you venture into another high-sided valley with another slope. High-sided valley off of another slope that is where you'll find the Eden Valley, where some Cabernet and Shiraz is grown. It doesn't come to be as ripe as the Barossa Valley, but what you're going to find up there a lot is Riesling. And spectacular place to visit is a place called Puseyvale up there that makes this really cool wine on this old vineyard that was planted by the Silesians way back, called the Contours Vineyard. And instead of planting it in rows, they planted the vineyard with the contours of the hills. So it can't be mechanically harvested. It has to be worked by hand. It is beautiful, an awesome place. And so I've had that one a couple times, and I think I would venture more toward Clare with this. And so what makes Clare kind of unique is that it is such a cool spot that Clare grows just this piercing, racy acidity. And for those of you that have been tasting with us for a while, remember when we tasted the Tyrol's Semillon way back? And it had sort of that same kind of quality of acidity, that this sort of thing that kind of lodged in my mind, that Australia has this salinity element with its Semillon and with its Riesling in its youth in particular. And both of these wines, the Semillon and the Riesling, when they age a bit, and that's the unique part about Puseyvale, is they keep kind of a library selection of some of their Contours wines. And so you can taste wines going back a decade or more, and sometimes even more than that. And some of this acidity softens. And so it goes from sort of that squeeze of lime juice into that lime curd. Kathy's descriptor before of sort of that lime cordial. It's nice. It softens up a little bit. Maya, my dog, there agreeing with us. So, yeah, wonderful. It's just a really tasty wine. This is a wine that I have difficulty selling because people don't oftentimes think of drinking this with the course of a meal, but Thai food, for example, thank you, Maya, is a beautiful wine, and one that, especially for those of you kind of having some wines at home, this is a great wine to start with now, all the way through the rest of spring and summer. Having this chilled in the refrigerator, this is perfect for an aperitif. This is perfect for your first bite. It's perfect for your Thai meal, but it's a great wine to enjoy throughout the course of warmer weather. If you're hot and sweating and this is really chilled, this is magnificent. This is kind of akin to me in a way of sort of like a gin and tonic, sort of like a more tart-sided sort of margarita. This is sort of the wine equivalent of that. Riesling certainly is like the direct relation to me to a margarita, where you have that a sweeter variation in Riesling for sure, where you have sweetness and acidity. Before we dive into the final guess and unveiling this, what else could this be? What else should we be considering if this wasn't Riesling? And Jan, thank you. Maybe good with the new shrimp po' boy. Yeah, a little Cajun spice in the aioli and the it's used to make the coleslaw that accompanies the new po' boy. And one of the things you should consider, and that I always consider, and that we have a unique ability to consider by tasting in Virginia, is our understanding of Petit Manseng, and then, as I mentioned before, Chenin Blanc. And the reason being that you have in those three varietals high acidity as it ripens, so it doesn't lose as much of its acidity. So when you taste something that's super acidic, you should start thinking about Petit Manseng, Riesling, and of course Chenin Blanc too. Rachel's throwing out Pinot Blanc, and I think that's absolutely an appropriate guess, especially because Pinot Blanc oftentimes gives you lemon and gives you citrus and has a fair amount of acidity, and the profile coloring-wise would be very, very similar, as would the way the wine is made, stainless steel or kind of neutral oak, not oftentimes necessarily something that has a super richness to it. Pinot Gris, Chris, I think, yeah, you're going to get some aromatic off Pinot Gris, but nowhere near the amount of aromatics that you'd pick up on this, and so I think you could rule out Pinot Gris pretty fast. Appearance-wise, you should consider that, but as you get into the actual aroma and the taste, you'd venture away from Pinot Gris. But the Riesling and Chenin Blanc and Petit Manseng all giving you a ton of aromatics that are different, mind you, but at least you're knowing that you've got high acidity and aromatics. This is at least a few varietals that you might want to consider. So, and Candy, thank you for your point there. Yes, Riesling does go with everything. I mean, I find myself personally, because I enjoy Riesling, you could grill a steak and I'll drink a Riesling with that any day of the week. I'm just happy to have Riesling in the glass. So, all right, I'm going to go 2019, so a newer vintage of Australian Riesling, and I'm going to stick my flag in the Clare Valley, a cool climate, Australian minerally saline kind of lime element. But if it's New Zealand or if it's Tasmania or if it's somewhere else, that'd be cool to find out. If it's old world, I'll be really surprised. But let's see. Let's see where we are. Oh, fantastic. Great. So this is Jim Barry from the Watervale Vineyard Riesling 2019. We did it. That's great. This is fantastic. Flavors of lemon and lime, perfect match for seafood or spicy Asian cuisine. We're doing well there. And it is, Craig's throwing me a note saying that it's 13% alcohol. Thank you, Craig. Yeah, I'm not finding that necessarily. There we go. 12.5% by volume alcohol. This is just right where I thought it was. So awesome wine. I hope you guys enjoy this. Kathy, yep, you nailed it. This is great. Watervale making some really cool, really fantastic wines. And where you'd think perhaps that this wine wouldn't age, it will. So it will change, and You'll go from sort of this super salinity to a little bit of a kind of a toast quality, like a fresh toasted bread, maybe a little bit of a light butter veneer on that, and then sort of a lime curd element over it. So if you want to get some and throw it away in a corner of your cellar for a period of time and forget about it, it's not something that will go bad. It's something that I think this wine will showcase for time to come if you can keep it around, because it's pretty dang delicious. So fun to do Riesling and fun to talk about a great varietal that I think everybody appreciates but doesn't necessarily always consume. And so I'm always happy to talk about and consume and drink Riesling. So cheers to all of you. Thank you very much for participating. We'll have a Riesling, I think, at least one on offer at our spring wine buying event, which is coming up not this Saturday, but a week from Saturday. And I think there are about 5 or so spaces available to participate in that event. There'll be 18 wines that we pour between 12 and 2, depending on the time that you get to sign up for. You can come out and taste a bunch of wines with us. If that doesn't work for your schedule, then we'll see you back here on Thursdays. Next Thursday, I don't know what it is. It's not part of this series of knowing the varietal, so we'll discover something new together. And until then, I wish you a great week and the happy rest of your evening consuming the rest of this guy. Cheers, everybody.